Mr. Farber, I mean, one of the things that that I also wanted you to elaborate on as you were talking about the wind decision, and it was something that we were anticipating. As a matter of fact, I know the executive had written down the revenues by the tone, and I think it was in tune of $80 million or something like that in anticipation. But then that was part of the consideration of, that money was included in our current budget. So if you could elaborate a little bit on that, what that meant for this particular savings plan as well. And in addition to that, as you were doing a little bit of history, recent history, I don't know if you mentioned, but of course, one of the actions that the council took was to rebase the school system's budget, which was very significant in how we structurally addressed this very difficult deficit. And in addition, as we try to be as progressive as possible with the furloughs, the council did voluntarily also give up some of its salary so that we would also participate in this whole entire process. So I think this has been a multi-dimensional approach, but speak a little bit about that $80 million and, where are we, what impact did that have on where we are right now? And most certainly, of course, we'll have all these conversations in the fall about how to systemically approach this as we get into further savings plans for next year.
$85 million was set aside in a special reserve in anticipation of the possibility that we might lose in the wind case. That was a very wise thing to do and supported by both the executive and the council. This year's budget, the fiscal 16 budget, was so tight because revenues have really started to fall that unfortunately there was no room for a wind reserve of that kind. And so it was not included. And as you know, the budget as a whole went up by only 1.7%. That's much less than it went up the previous 3 years as we started to recover from the recession. But our revenues as a whole are not nearly as strong as we'd like them to be. And I'm sure the executive would have recommended and the council would have agreed to a substantial wind reserve for fiscal 16 had it been possible, but unfortunately the revenue picture did not permit it.
We're going to have a roll call vote on the savings plan. The clerk will please call the roll.
Mr. Elrich?
Yes.
Mr. Elrich votes yes. Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Berliner?
Yes.
Mr. Berliner votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Reamer? Mr. Reamer votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes.
Ms. Navarro votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Ms. Florine?
Yes.
Ms. Florine votes yes. Mr. Leventhal?
Mr. Leventhal votes yes, and in response to the county executive's request for $51 million in savings, we are producing $54 million in savings.